Okay, so same thing over here. We had 7 minus 12. Okay, so the negative 12, remember minus is no longer minus, it's now negative. This negative 12 was bigger than this 7, which gives us an answer with the sign of negative 5. Okay, all right. Now, let's look at the next part of what we do when we're adding and subtracting, well, actually subtracting positive and negative numbers. So that's what happens when you have two positive values. That's what that's considered. Now let's see what happens when you have two negative numbers. And again, this is a little more tricky. So let's say sample 1. Okay, let's say you have negative 4 minus negative 6. Okay, now I want to show you this on the number line, then I'm going to tell you how to do it. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So let's see what happens. This tells us our starting point, correct? So we have a negative 4 is our starting point. This negative tells me that I need to keep going in the negative direction, right? But this negative tells me to reverse that direction and come back. So I teach my students, before they even start plotting this on the number line, not to even do this. I teach them to write the first number. This whole thing, we circle it. When you see this negative like that, it becomes a plus. I call this a broken plus. When I put that circle around it, you can kind of see how it looks like a little bit like a broken plus sign. When you have a negative here, like this, it is reversed, so it becomes a plus sign. Now it becomes this actual problem. So I start with negative 4 plus or positive 6. So now let's tell me I need to go 6 in the positive direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Landing me on a positive 2. Now what you will notice here is this is similar to something we learned when we were doing addition. What do we do with this? We take these two numbers, we subtract them, and take the sign of the bigger number. So we have 6 minus 4, which gave us 2. What was the sign of the bigger number? Positive. So the sign of our answer is going to be positive. Okay? Now, let's look at what happens when we have two negative numbers in a slightly different situation. Now, I would recommend that we study over this a couple of times because it's not as simple, and plugging this into the calculator can spit you out a wrong answer. I cannot stress that enough. I am a proponent of calculators for advanced level math. However, when it comes to doing positive and negative numbers, I discourage it greatly. And you need to know what the calculator should spit back out to you. If it's a positive or a negative number, you need to at least be able to look at the problem and say, hey, this answer is going to be positive or this answer is going to be negative. That way, if the calculator gives you something wonky, you know, hold up, that did not go right, okay? All right, so here we go. Let's look at another example. Negative 5 minus a negative 2. Okay? Now, do we have that negative situation? Yes, we do. And I teach my students to circle that. And when they circle it, they kind of can tell that it looks a little bit like a broken plus sign. So they're going to rewrite the problem. Negative 5 plus a positive 2. Now, just using our rules alone, we know that the bigger number here is a negative. So the sign of this answer should be negative. So we have negative 5 plus 2. If we subtract those, we end up with a negative 3. Now let's check it on the number line and see if that's accurate. Okay. So our starting point is at the -5. Agreed? So we're going to go over to the -5 and put it there. This tells us to come back in the positive direction to the right 2 places. So 1, 2. We jump off at -3. So yes, our rules help us. Okay. So I want to look at a couple examples of this without putting it on a number line. So we can see how this works without the number line. This is super important. Okay. So let's go back here. We're going to do example 3 next. So let's say you have -28 minus a -69. Okay, what does our rule say to do with this negative situation? Circle that. Looks like a broken plus sign. So now we have a -28 plus 69. Now, we should stop right here. What is the sign of my answer going to be? I look at the 2, the 69 is bigger, the sign of my answer has to be positive. So it's going to be positive. Then I take 69 and subtract 28, and I get 41. Let's double check that, make sure. Lately me and basic math is not getting along. Yes, 41. Okay, so take the sign of the bigger. That should be the sign of your answer. And then subtract the 2 numbers. Now, if you want to plug this into a calculator, all right, it's very important that you do these steps precisely. Okay, so we have negative, what if we can see that? 28 plus 69. Enter. We end up with a positive 41. There is another way to enter this. You could enter this exactly. This calculator will do it. Other calculators will not. All right, let's see if it gives us the correct. This calculator will do it correctly. Okay. Now, back in the older days, not even a few years, just a few years ago, we used to always caution students, don't plug this in the calculator because the calculator cannot keep up with order of operations and will spit out the wrong thing. Now, this TI 84 Plus, it will do it, but not all calculators are created equal. So you need to know what to expect, at least for the sign of the answer before you plug it into a calculator. Okay. All right. Now, let's look at another example of this. I'm going to clean this side. Clean this side. All right. And let's look at what happens when you have an example that looks like this. So let's say we have -15 minus a -5. All right. Do we have the negative situation in the middle? Yes, we do. So again, we're going to circle that situation. And we're going to rewrite the problem. -15 plus 5 equals. Well, stop right here. What should the sign of our answer be? If you said negative, you got it. So 15 is bigger here. So we say negative, and then we subtract the 2 numbers and get -10. Okay? So that is the first half of subtracting rules. Now we have to look at what happens when you have a different scenario. Okay, so we have 2 other rules that apply to subtracting that we need to consider. All right. Let's say you had this situation. 11 subtract a negative 8. Okay? Anything look familiar here? Do we have that negative situation again? Yes, we do. So, let's rewrite it. We circle this little part that's broken. That becomes a plus. So 11 plus 8 is 19. Pretty simple. Okay? All right, now we have one more scenario to consider for subtracting. And it is this scenario here. Okay. So I have a -7 and a -12. Now, some teachers teach their students to rewrite this. I do not mind which way you do it. If you can see that that's two negatives, the answer is going to be negative. Because if I go -7 on the number line and then have to go another -12, I'm still in the negatives. Okay? Now, some teachers say students have trouble with that, so what they teach them to do is this. What happens when you add two negative numbers? The answer stays negative, right? So you have a -19. This is -19. So, whichever method works for you. If you can look at this one and just know, I'm looking at two negative numbers, I'm going to be still in the negatives, you don't have to rewrite the problem. If you're one who this makes more sense to you, like many students find that the addition rules make a little more sense to them than the subtracting rules. So if it's easier for you to rewrite it as an addition problem and then work it, perfectly fine. Whatever helps you get to the right answer. That's what we're trying to learn how to do. Okay, that concludes all of our rules for subtracting integers. Next, we're going to learn about multiplying and dividing them. Thank you.